Have you ever paused and wondered, why do we smile with tender patience when a baby wets itself, yet frown, even recoil, when an elderly parent does the same? The act is the same. The body, vulnerable, dependent, behaves the same. But our reactions? Completely different. This small question holds the seed of great awakening. Because how we respond to life, to aging, to weakness, to dependence, says more about our hearts than about those we're judging. You see, when a baby loses control, we call it cute. When an old mother does, we call it disgusting. But why? Why is one met with affection and the other with aversion? The answer isn't simple. It's buried deep in the conditioning of our modern world, where youth is celebrated, productivity is worshipped, and aging is seen as an inconvenience rather than a sacred return. But in Buddhism, we look deeper. We ask not just what happens, but how our minds relate to what happens. This question, this quiet observation, becomes a doorway. A doorway into the teachings of impermanence, compassion, ego, and the cyclical nature of life. Let me tell you a story. Not long ago, a middle-aged man brought his elderly mother to a temple where I was residing. She walked slowly, one foot barely lifting from the stone floor. Her son sighed heavily as he supported her. "She's getting worse," he said, half to me, half to himself. "Can't remember things. Wet the bed again last night. It's exhausting." I looked at the mother. She was looking around the temple with the wide-eyed wonder of a child. Her hands trembled. Her lips mumbled a chant she could no longer fully recall. But there was a kind of innocence in her, as softness. She reminded me of a child returning home after a long journey. And then it struck me. Life is not a straight line. It's a circle. We are born needing care, we grow strong and independent, and then, if we live long enough, we return to that state of need. Not because we are regressing, but because we are completing the arc. In that moment, the son wasn't just looking at an aging parent. He was looking at his past and his future, all at once. The very hands that now needed help had once fed him, bathed him, held him through fever and fear. And now, in their trembling state, they were silently asking, "Will you love me still, even now? Even when I'm not useful to you?" This is where the Dharma begins. Not in temples or scriptures, but in moments like these. Moments when the illusion of separation begins to fade. You see, in the Buddhist teachings, there is no fixed self, no permanent identity. The baby, the adult, the elder, they are all phases of the same flowing river. Different ripples, same water. To cling to one phase, to say, "I only love when you're young," or "I only respect when you're strong," is to misunderstand the nature of existence. We suffer not because others age or decay. We suffer because we resist the truth of impermanence. When we recoil at the sight of an aging parent's frailty, it's not just them we are rejecting, it's the part of ourselves that we don't want to face. The part that is scared of decline. The part that wants control and finds none in the withering of time. But when we meet that moment with compassion, with tenderness, something changes. We are no longer fighting life. We are embracing it. We are no longer serving the ego. We are honoring the truth. So this question, this "why do we love babies who wet themselves but not old parents?" is not just about social norms or personal hygiene. It is a mirror. It reflects our biases, our attachments, our fear of death. And it invites us to wake up, to see our parents not as burdens, but as mirrors of our own becoming. To see care not as a duty, but as a path. to see the aging body not as a shameful thing to be hidden, but as a sacred reminder of what it means to be alive. Because one day, if we are lucky, we too will return to that softness. We too will tremble and forget and need help. And in that moment, may we be surrounded not by irritation, but by love. May someone kneel beside us, not with disgust, but with reverence. The way we kneel beside a sleeping child. The Buddha once said, to repay even a single breath given by one's parents is more than a lifetime's work. And yet, most of us wait until it's too late. We postpone tenderness. We delay gratitude. But what if we didn't? What if every time our parent aged a little more, we sought it not as loss, but as invitation? An invitation to love better, to love deeper, to love without condition. This is where the journey begins, not with grand philosophies, but with simple questions. Questions that disturb the surface and invite us inward. And so I leave you with this. The next time you see an old parent struggle, ask not why are they like this. Ask instead, can I love them like I once loved their love for me? Because in that answer, you may just meet the Buddha. When we hear the word mother, what truly arises in our hearts? Is it just the woman who gave us life? Or is it something deeper, the first presence that loved us without asking anything in return, the one who carried us through darkness before we even knew what fear was? In Buddhism, mother is not merely a biological role. She is often the first expression of boundless compassion we experience in this world. Long before we could speak, we understood her warmth. Before we knew the Dharma, we were held in her silence. She was our first teacher, not through words, but through patience, care, and the rhythm of her breath as she held us close. And yet, as we grow, we forget. We forget that our strength was built on her exhaustion, that our independence was born from her sacrifice. We begin to see her as someone in the background, always there, always available, yet rarely noticed until her absence aches. But on the spiritual path, we are taught to look again, and to look deeply. In Mahayana Buddhism, there's a meditation where we'd imagined every being as having once been our mother in the past life. The fly, the stranger, even the one who hurt us, they may have cradled us once, offered us milk when we were helpless, and stayed awake through nights of fever just to keep us alive. Why such a radical idea? Because it breaks the illusion of separation. It trains our heart to see all beings as sacred, and to recognize the hidden tenderness in even the hardest lives. But before we extend that vision to all beings, we must return to the very first one, our actual mother, and ask ourselves honestly, have I truly seen her? The Buddha once said that even if you carried your mother on one shoulder, and your father on the other, for 100 years, feeding them, washing them, and tending to their needs, still you would not have repaid the debt of their kindness. Not because we owe them something material, but because they gave us the greatest gift, a human life. A chance to walk the path, to awaken, to be free. And yet, how often do we treat our mother as someone owed responsibility, rather than someone worthy of reverence? We become irritated at her forgetfulness. We feel burdened by her needs. We label her emotions as overbearing or out of touch. But we forget, this is the same woman who once bent down hundreds of times a day, to clean, to soothe, to feed, and never called it a sacrifice. So ask yourself this, if your mother were not just your mother, but a manifestation of compassion in this lifetime, how would you treat her? Would you speak more gently? Would you listen with more patience? Would you touch her hand not as a formality, but as an offering? If your mother has already passed, it is not too late. You can honor her in your practice, in each breath of mindfulness, in every act of kindness, in the way you care for others as she once cared for you. Her presence is still alive in the tenderness you carry, in the calm you offer the world. In this way, love never ends. It simply changes form. So who is Mother in the human journey? She is not just a role. She is a mirror. A reminder of what we are capable of when we love without condition. A living gateway to understanding the Dharma, not as philosophy, but as lived experience. And if we look with the eyes of the heart, we may see that the first bodhisattva we ever met was not carved in gold or seated on a lotus. She was wearing worn clothes, cooking our meals, and whispering lullabies long after midnight. There was a time, though we may not fully remember it, when our entire world fit into the curve of our mother's arms. In those early days, we had no names for fear, no understanding of loneliness, no concept of suffering. All we knew was presence, warmth, safety, a steady heartbeat that anchored us in a world too large for our senses to grasp. And that presence was her. She was the first sound we recognized, the first scent we associated with peace, the first human face we ever trusted. Before we knew anything of this world, we knew her. She fed us when we could not lift our own heads. She cleaned us, clothed us, held us when our cries had no words. To her, we were never inconvenient, never too loud, never too much. Even when we interrupted her sleep for the 5th time in a single night, she came, not with resentment, but with instinctual love. And this is the mystery. We don't remember these moments, but they shaped everything. Her arms taught us that the world could be soft. Her voice taught us that pain could be soothed. Her gaze, the way it lingered on our face with unshakable tenderness, told us we mattered, long before we could understand what that meant. In those years, she was everything. Our protector, our source of comfort, our entire sky. But something happens as we grow. The child learns to walk, and in walking, forgets the one who once knelt beside every stumble. The child learns to speak, and in speaking, forgets the silence in which Mother waited patiently, listening with her whole being. The independence we celebrate slowly pushes away the dependence that once bound us in sacred closeness. We begin to forget. And with forgetting, comes distance. And yet, what we call growing up is, in part, a quiet amnesia, a forgetting of where we came from. But the Dharma reminds us, everything we are is made of what we've received. No child raises itself. No soul reaches maturity without the invisible labor of someone who gave without asking anything in return. And often, that someone was her. So when we sit in meditation, when we chant sutras, when we speak of compassion and selflessness, do we ever pause to reflect, who first lived this for me? Who showed me, before I could grasp the Dharma, what unconditional love feels like? It was her. And this is why, in many Buddhist cultures, Mother is honored not only as a family figure, but as a living embodiment of compassion in action. Not because she was perfect, but because she loved, again and again, even when she was tired, even when she was alone, even when her heart was breaking. When we were children, we did not thank her. We simply expected her to be there. But now, as adults on the spiritual path, we are given a second chance. A chance to return. To see her not through the eyes of expectation, but through the lens of deep understanding. To realize that our journey toward awakening did not begin in a temple or retreat center. It began in her arms, in her sacrifices, in her silent prayers that we never heard but which held us nonetheless. If your mother is still alive, look at her not just as your parent, but as your first teacher of love without limits. If she has passed, Then carry her within your practice. Dedicate each act of kindness to her memory. Breathe gently, live simply, and offer the fruits of your path to the one who first made your life possible. Because when we were children, she was everything. And perhaps the most sacred act we can offer in this life is to become for others even a fraction of what she was for us. Time moves forward quietly. One day we are a child clinging to the hem of our mother's dress, and the next, we are rushing out the door, chasing goals, chasing freedom, chasing everything we once believed would define our success. Growing up, we rarely notice the moment we stop needing her in the same way. There is no ceremony to mark that subtle departure. No bell that rings when her name becomes less central in our prayers. It just happens, gradually, silently. And with that slow shift, we begin to forget. Not forget her existence, but forget her essence. The small things go first. The way she always placed food on our plate before her own. The way she folded our laundry with care even after long hours of work. The way she stayed up at night not because she had to, but because she couldn't sleep until she knew we were safe. We forget that behind her firm voice was a heart constantly worried. That every argument she started came from love, even if clumsy, even if loud. We forget, because life teaches us to focus forward, to become independent, to break away. And while there is growth in that, there is also danger, the danger of emotional blindness, of taking her for granted. The Buddha spoke of moha, delusion, as one of the three poisons of the mind. And perhaps one of the greatest delusions is believing that the people who love us most will always be there. So we postpone phone calls. We roll our eyes at repeated stories. We silence our patience. We think there will always be more time. But time is not generous with certainty. Time is silent. And while we chase after the world, she waits in the quiet, hoping, not that we will succeed, but that we will remember her. That we will come home, not with trophies, but with presence. There's a story I once heard about a son who became very successful. He traveled far, made money, gained status. His mother, now old and frail, sat every evening near the window, waiting for a visit that rarely came. One day, the son returned with gifts, proud to show her his achievements. But she, barely able to see now, touched his face and whispered, "I just wanted your voice, not your victories." That is the truth many of us ignore. Our parents, especially our mothers, are not proud of us because we accomplished things. They are proud because we live, because we breathe, because we still remember them. In forgetting her, we are not just losing connection, we are losing a piece of our humanity. The teachings of the Buddha are rooted in remembrance, remembering our true nature, remembering the impermanence of life, and remembering the interdependence of all beings. When we forget our mother, we forget one of the first beings who made that interdependence visible, through action, through care, through sacrifice. And yet, the good news is, remembrance is always available. It only takes a pause, a breath, a turning inward. Ask yourself, when was the last time you looked into your mother's eyes, not as a child expecting something, but as a soul offering gratitude? When was the last time you asked her about her youth, her fears, her dreams that were left behind so that yours could flourish? When we grow up, we are given a new kind of freedom, the freedom to become conscious again, to choose what we forgot, to return with wisdom, not just instinct. And when we return to her, in thought, in word, in care, we are not just doing a good deed. We are walking the path of awakening. Because to remember her is to remember the truth of life, that we are not self-made, that love is not earned by perfection, and that the roots of our existence are soaked in someone else's quiet suffering. So grow up, fly far, achieve much, but do not let success harden your heart. Do not let pride blind your vision. And when your hands are full, let your heart remain open for the one who once gave you everything with empty hands. Because one day, you will look back and realize that in forgetting her, you lost something holy. But in remembering her, even for a moment, you came back to something sacred. There comes a time, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, when the mother who once carried us in her arms begins to need our arms to carry her. Her steps become unsure. Her memory flickers like an old lantern. Her hands, once strong enough to hold the weight of a family, now tremble when lifting a cup of tea. And yet, so often, we meet this return not with tenderness, but with resistance. In the cycle of life, this moment is not an accident. It is a return. The body that once nurtured now asks to be nurtured. The same way we once wet ourselves in innocence and were gently cleaned by her loving hands, she now does the same. But where she responded with compassion, we so often respond with frustration. We say, "She's being difficult." We sigh when she forgets. We raise our voices when she repeats. But in truth, she is not being difficult. She is simply aging, just as nature intended. The Buddha taught that everything born is subject to aging, sickness, and death. This is not a flaw in the design, it is the design. And in that truth, there is great teaching. Because when a mother begins to lose her strength, it is not a tragedy. It is an opportunity. A chance for the child to become the caregiver. A sacred reversal that completes the circle of karma. But to embrace this opportunity, we must release our ego. We must stop measuring others by their usefulness. In the eyes of the world, a mother who can no longer cook, clean, or advise may seem like a burden. But in the eyes of wisdom, she is still a field of merit. Still worthy. Still holy. Her body may be fragile, but her spirit holds stories, scars, and silent prayers that shape who we are. There is a kind of grace in this decline, if we are awake enough to see it. Her slowing movements remind us to slow down. Her forgetfulness teaches us to be patient. Her needs challenge us to grow past self-centeredness and into compassion. I once watched a man lift his mother into bed. She was in her late 80s, unable to stand. He cradled her gently, the way she had once cradled him. After laying her down, he kissed her forehead. "Thank you for everything, Ma," he whispered. She didn't respond. Perhaps she no longer understood words, but she smiled, faintly, as if her soul still remembered the love she had once given and was now receiving. That is the hidden beauty of this stage in life. When the roles reverse, we are invited to love without condition. Not because she is doing something for us, but because she once did everything for us. And now, it is our turn. In Buddhism, this is not just moral. It is spiritual. Caring for our parents, especially when they grow old, is one of the most powerful acts of merit we can offer. It purifies the heart. It dismantles selfishness. It allows us to see clearly that one day, we too will be in her place. And when that time comes, what will we hope for? A clean bed? Yes. A gentle voice? Certainly. But more than that, we will long to be seen. To not be forgotten. To not be treated as something in a way. We will hope that someone looks past our weakness and still sees our worth. So begin that now. When you see your mother struggle to stand, don't rush her. Support her. When she asks you the same question again, don't snap. Answer it with the same patience she gave you when you asked, "Why is the sky blue?" 100 times. And when she makes mistakes, remember, you once spilled milk, scribbled on walls, and cried without reason, and she never stopped loving you. This stage of her life is not shameful. It is sacred. It is not the end of her story. It is a soft and quiet return. Just as the sun sets gently at dusk, so too does a mother return to the softness from which she came. And if we meet this return with love, not pity, but deep reverence, then we are not just being good children. We are being awakened beings. We are walking the very path the Buddha pointed to, the path of seeing suffering clearly and choosing love anyway. Because one day, the bed she lies in may be ours. The hand she reaches for may be the same hand we one day extend. And the love we give her now, gently, patiently, wholly, may be the very love that carries us when our own strength fades. Let us be honest, caring for an aging parent is not always easy. There are days when patience wears thin, when we repeat the same explanation for the 5th time, when we clean up after another accident, another spill, another moment that reminds us just how far they've declined. And in those moments, we feel something rise, not compassion, but irritation. Not tenderness, but tightness. We ask ourselves, why is this so hard? But what we rarely ask is, what part of me is resisting this? This is where the Dharma meets daily life in the rawest way. Because the frustration we feel is not simply because our mother is weak or forgetful. It's because our ego is being challenged. The ego, that fragile, demanding sense of I, doesn't like to be inconvenienced. It doesn't like being slowed down, interrupted, or made to feel powerless. It wants to be in control, efficient, independent. And when our aging mother disrupts that, with her needs, her slowness, her vulnerability, the ego flinches. It says, I shouldn't have to deal with this. But the path of awakening invites a deeper look. What if this discomfort is not a problem to fix, but a doorway to growth? In Buddhism, we speak of the 3 poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. But there's a 4th we often overlook: entitlement. The belief that life should be easy, that others should meet our expectations, that love should never be inconvenient. But true love, the kind the Buddha spoke of, is not based on ease. It is based on understanding. Your mother is not trying to be difficult. She is not intentionally slowing you down. She is simply in a different phase of the same life cycle you are in. She once held your hand when you were clumsy. Now it is your turn to hold hers when she stumbles. And if you feel annoyed, that's okay. But don't stop there. Look deeper. Ask, what is this irritation protecting? What fear lies underneath it? Often, it is the fear of our own aging, of our own eventual decline. Seeing her lose memory, lose balance, lose dignity, it reminds us that we too are fragile. That the strong, youthful self we cling to is not permanent. And that realization shakes the ego. But it also purifies the heart. Because if we can sit with this discomfort, without turning away, without numbing ourselves, we begin to transform. We begin to soften. We begin to love not with our preferences, but with our presence. I remember once visiting a devotee who cared for his bedridden mother full-time. He told me, there are days I get frustrated. But then I sit at the edge of her bed, take her wrinkled hand in mine, and remember, these are the same hands that once bathed me, fed me, taught me how to hold a spoon. And suddenly, I cry. Not from sadness, but from something deeper, a kind of grateful ache. This is the beauty hidden within our frustration. If we follow it inward, it doesn't lead us into more anger, it leads us to humility, to truth, to a direct experience of anatta, non-self. Because in those moments, we realize we are not separate. Her aging is our future. Her suffering is our mirror. And caring for her is not about duty. It's about awakening. So next time you feel the sting of impatience, pause. Breathe it. And instead of reacting, reflect. Instead of hardening, vow. Because that discomfort you feel is not just a burden, it is the very edge of your spiritual path. It is where the self loosens, where compassion deepens, where wisdom begins. To care for a fading parent is not a detour from your practice. It is the heart of your practice. Because what we do for them now, we are also doing for the world, softening the sharp edges of karma, offering a glimpse of the love we once received, and planting seeds of merit that ripple far beyond what the eye can see. And one day, when your own hands tremble, when your own memory slips, when you become the one needing help, may someone meet you not with frustration, but with grace. The same grace you chose to offer, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. When we look at our mother now, gray-haired, slower, sometimes forgetful, we often see only the role she has played in our lives. That's my mom, we say. The woman who raised me, who scolded me, who worried over every little thing. But what we forget, or perhaps never truly realized, is that before she was our mother, she was someone else entirely. She was once a girl, with dreams, with fears, with secrets no one knew. She laughed with friends, stayed up late thinking about the future, cried quietly when her heart broke. She had ambitions that had nothing to do with diapers or dishes or doctor's appointments. She had a name, a voice, and a rhythm of life that belonged only to her. And then, she became a mother. In that moment, everything changed. Her world shifted from I to we. Her body became a vessel for someone else's life. Her time, her sleep, her comfort, all surrendered in service of a small, fragile being who didn't even know how to say thank you. That being was you. She put her life on pause so yours could begin. Maybe she gave up her studies. Maybe she turned down an opportunity. Maybe she simply chose to stay home when the world was calling her elsewhere. And she did it, not because she was forced, but because love whispered louder than ambition. Because the joy of watching you take your first steps meant more to her than any promotion ever could. And yet, as we grow, we often forget to see her as a full human being. We only remember the times she was tired, or strict, or overprotective. We forget that she was carrying more than just groceries or laundry baskets. She was carrying a lifetime of responsibilities, often in silence. The Buddha taught us to see things as they truly are, not through the lens of our biases, but with clear awareness. And that includes seeing our parents not just as parents, but as people. People who were shaped by their own wounds, who carried their own karma, who did the best they could with the tools they had. Your mother may not have been perfect. She may have made mistakes. But beneath those mistakes was a heart that loved you, even when she didn't know how to show it. Even when her own pain got in the way. Even when the world didn't thank her, and neither did you. To truly honor her now, you must see her whole. Not just as the tired voice on the phone. Not just as the woman who keeps asking if you've eaten. But as a soul who once stood at the same threshold you now stand at, full of questions, full of longing, full of possibility. I once met a woman who said, "I never knew my mother had dreams until after she died." I found her journals, pages filled with poetry, with sketches, with hopes she never spoke of. I cried not just because I missed her, but because I had never really known her. Let us not wait for loss to open our eyes. Ask her. Listen to her stories. Not the ones she tells at every family gathering, but the quiet ones, the ones buried beneath her busyness. Ask her what she wanted to be as a child. What made her heart light up before life became so heavy. Sit beside her, not just as her child, but as a fellow human being. Because when you see your mother not just as mom, but as a soul with her own journey, something profound happens. Your resentment softens. Your judgments dissolve. And in their place, love arises, not the love of dependency, but the love of true recognition. She was someone before she was yours. And she still is. And when we remember that, we offer her a rare and beautiful gift, not just care, but dignity. Not just attention, but appreciation. Not just support, but the quiet affirmation that her story matters. That her existence is seen. So the next time you sit beside her, try this, look at her face, really look. See the lines not as signs of age, but as evidence of everything she's lived through. Hear her voice not as background noise, but as the echo of years of sacrifice. And when she tells you something small, something you've heard before, don't rush her. Let her speak. Let her be. Because in that moment, you are not just a listener. You are a witness. And every soul deserves that. There is a dangerous illusion that lives quietly in the back of our minds, the illusion that we still have time. Time to say what needs to be said. Time to do what needs to be done. Time to show up, to return a call, to visit, to care, to express the love we carry but so rarely speak aloud. And yet, as the Buddha reminded us again and again, impermanence is not theoretical. It is constant, immediate, and often invisible until it's too late. So we say, I'll call her tomorrow. I'll visit next month. I'll spend more time when I'm less busy. But time is not waiting. And neither is she. The truth is, one day, perhaps sooner than we'd expect, our mother's voice will go quiet. The hands we took for granted will no longer reach out. The number we used to scroll past in our phone will ring, and no one will answer. And when that day comes, what will echo louder than anything else is not what we did, but what we didn't do. Mindfulness, in its essence, is not just about breathing or sitting in silence. It is about showing up, fully, for the moments that matter. It is about recognizing that this day, this hour, this conversation, could be the last. It is about loving not in theory, but in action. Not later, but now. Filial piety, honoring and caring for one's parents, is not just a cultural ideal. It is a deeply spiritual practice. In Buddhism, it is seen as one of the greatest sources of merit because it strikes at the root of the ego. It requires us to put aside our pride, our plans, our self-importance, and return humbly to where we came from. There's a line in the sutras that says, "To love your parents while they are still alive is to bow to the Buddha while the Buddha still breathes." It means that the opportunity to serve them, to make them smile, to ease their pain, is sacred, not mundane. It is a chance to embody the Dharma not with words, but with presence. To love them now, while they can still feel it, while they can still respond, while they are still here. A woman once told me, with tears in her voice, "I spent so many years annoyed at my mother's calls, brushing her off, telling her I was busy. After she passed, I wouldn't have given anything just to hear her say my name again." She paused. Even once. Why do we wait? Why do we need the silence of death to finally open our hearts? The time to love is not when the body has gone cold, but when the breath still lingers, even if it's shallow. When the eyes still open, even if they don't see clearly. When the hands still move, even if they tremble. So, begin today. Not with grand gestures, but with simple presence. Call her, not to check a box, but to hear her voice. Sit beside her, not because it's convenient, but because it's precious. Ask her how she's really doing, and listen. Hold her hand. Look into her eyes. Let your love be felt, not just assumed. And when you serve her, when you help her dress, when you repeat yourself with patience, when you carry her tired body with care, remember, this is not a chore. This is a form of awakening. This is mindfulness in its highest expression. This is love made visible. And if she's no longer here, do not despair. Carry her memory into your practice. Dedicate your good deeds to her merit. Sit in stillness and whisper words you never said while she was alive. She will hear them, in the quiet depths of your heart. She is not gone. She has only changed form. And the love you offer now still reaches her, beyond time, beyond form. To love your mother now, not later, is to understand the Dharma in your bones. It is to see clearly that life is fleeting, and that love, when practiced with presence, becomes a bridge between worlds. It is to live without regret. Because the truth is this, the greatest sadness is not losing her, it's realizing you had so many chances to love her, and didn't take them. There comes a moment in every life, quiet, irreversible, when the world changes, not on the outside, but within. That moment is when a mother dies. The sky may look the same. The sun still rises. People still laugh in cafes. Traffic still moves through city streets. But something unspeakable vanishes from your inner world. As softness, as shelter, a warmth that once existed without needing to be earned. It is gone. And you feel it in everything. People often say, I miss her voice, or I miss her food. But what they are truly missing is far more sacred, the unshakable sense that no matter what happened, there was one person in this world who loved them beyond logic, beyond mistakes, beyond time. When that love leaves the physical world, what is left is not emptiness, but a silence so deep, it echoes. In the Dharma, we speak of dukkha, suffering, unsatisfactoriness, and its roots in attachment. But when a mother passes, the pain is not just about attachment to form. It is the aching recognition that the one who first introduced us to love is now only a memory. And yet, that memory is everywhere. In the way we fold the blanket, in the smell of a certain dish, in the way we hold our own children without realizing we are copying the very hands that once held us. A man once told me, I didn't cry at my mother's funeral. But months later, I was walking through the market and saw a woman buying mangoes the way she used to. I broke down. Right there. Mangoes, of all things. That's when I realized I had lost the person who made even the most ordinary things feel like home. When mother is gone, the world doesn't just become lonelier, it becomes harder, colder. Because we realize, often too late, that she was the soft pillow for our soul. The one place where we could be weak without judgment. Where we could fail and still be loved. Where we could cry, and someone would still say, it's okay. I'm here. That I'm here, no longer being here, is the wound that never fully closes. But Buddhism also teaches us that nothing truly disappears. It transforms. The body may return to dust, but the love remains. It lives in our breath, in our choices, in the small ways we now care for others. Every act of kindness we show, especially when it's hard, becomes a continuation of her. Every time we forgive instead of condemn, every time we listen instead of judge, every time we wrap someone in the warmth she once gave us, she is there, breathing through us, loving through us. Grief is not a mistake. It is sacred. It shows that we have loved deeply. And to grieve mindfully is to honor her with each tear, not by clinging to the past, but by living her love in the present. Some people light incense for their mothers every year. Others write letters, long after the body is gone. Some keep a quiet altar at home, a photograph, a piece of her handwriting, a favorite scarf. These are not acts of sorrow, they are acts of remembrance. Acts of continuation. We do not move on from her. We carry her. In silence, in prayer, in presence. And one day, when it is our turn to leave, may we have loved others the way she loved us. Not perfectly, but fully. Not endlessly, but endlessly enough. Because when a mother dies, the soul loses a pillow, but gains a teacher. A teacher who now speaks not through voice, but through the spaces between our thoughts. Through the quiet invitations to return home, not to a place, but to the heart she once built inside us. And if you still have your mother, even just for a little while, cherish her. Hold her hand longer than necessary. Say the words while she can still hear them. Because the day she is gone, there will be so much you wish you had said. So much you wish you had done. And while you will go on a little different. A little softer. A little more aware that love, real love, is not forever in form, but forever in truth. So if your mother is gone, cry when you need to. But also smile when you remember. Live in a way that makes her proud. And in doing so, she lives on, not just in you, but through you. In the eyes of the world, a mother is just a role, a figure in the family, a caregiver, a woman who raises children and grows old. But in the light of the Dharma, she is far more. She is a doorway, a living expression of the four immeasurables: loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. She is the one who practiced these long before we knew their names. And for many of us, she was our first chance to receive love that expected nothing in return. The Buddha once said, "All beings have been your mother." It is a profound teaching, not because it turns strangers into family, but because it awakens us to the depth of connection that already exists beneath the illusion of separateness. But to truly understand this, we must begin with the one who was our mother in this life. To see her not just as the woman who gave us food, shelter, or discipline, but as our first true spiritual guide. She may never have taught us to meditate. She may never have read a single sutra. But she taught us presence. She taught us patience. She taught us to wake up when someone else is crying, and to respond with care. These are not small things. These are the foundations of awakening. And yet, in our search for truth, we often overlook the sacred in the ordinary. We seek wisdom in distant temples, in rare teachings, in ancient texts, and forget that the softest, most enduring wisdom may have been in the hands that buttoned our shirt when we were too small to do it ourselves. The Dharma is not about escaping the world. It's about seeing the world clearly and responding with love. And what greater opportunity is there than how we respond to our mother? To her aging, to her suffering, to her presence or her absence. The way we love her, or fail to, reveals how deeply we have understood the path. A disciple once asked the Buddha, "How can I serve you best?" The Buddha replied, care for your parents. It is a simple answer, but not an easy one. Because caring for our parents, especially in their vulnerability, touches all the parts of ourselves we prefer to avoid: our impatience, our pride, our buried resentment, our fear of impermanence. But it also offers the greatest mirror. It shows us where our compassion begins and where it ends. To bow to your mother is to bow to the life that made you possible. To serve her is to serve the continuation of love. To understand her suffering is to awaken your own heart to the suffering of all beings. Because she is not just your mother. She is a symbol. She is a reminder. She is a living doorway to the Buddha nature you carry within. And if you walk through that doorway, if you allow your relationship with her to become a field of practice, a source of insight, a path of letting go, then she becomes more than a parent. She becomes your teacher. Perhaps your greatest one. So today, wherever you are in life, whether your mother is by your side, lying in a hospital bed, sitting alone in a quiet home, or already gone, bring her into your heart. Not as a memory, not as a task, but as a sacred presence. Reflect on everything she gave, everything she withheld, everything she tried, even when she failed. Forgive her where she was human. Thank her where she was divine. And then, breathe the smile. Live the rest of your life as a reflection of her deepest wish for you, to be kind, to be awake, to be free from suffering. In that, she lives on. In that, she becomes the Dharma. Because when the path becomes difficult, and the world feels heavy, and your heart is tired, remember this: there was once a woman who carried you, who waited for you, who believed in you even when you didn't believe in yourself. That woman was your mother. And if you can love her with the eyes of the Dharma, you may discover that she was never just a person. She was a gate. And love, true love, is what walks through. Dear friend, if this video stirred something in your heart, a memory, a regret, a longing, don't let it pass in silence. Reach out to your mother if she's still here. Hold her. Listen to her. Love her now. And if your heart feels called, please share a memory, a reflection, or simply a thank you in the comments below. Sometimes, your story might be the healing someone else needs. If this message touched you, click like to help it reach more people. And don't forget to subscribe to Lotus of Dharma, so we may walk this path of love and awakening, together, with gentleness and grace. Thank you for being here. May peace fill your heart, moment by moment.